Hey kids! Okay, so this is your first video lecture and we're going to start with the basics of colonization and get all the way through most of the colonies, okay? So that's where we're starting today, and we're going to start with thinking about the age of exploration. So you just did a mock trial on Columbus and the Taínos Indians and trying to figure out who's at fault for this. There's a bunch of different players here, but ultimately what we're thinking about is the building of empires. And the system is a very complex one. Italy, at the current point in the late 1400s, was the center of trade. You had cities like Venice, you had cities like Naples that were really huge hotbeds for intellectual thought as well as merchant profits, right? And so Spain and Portugal wanted to move into this game. And Portugal really leads this shift. We see them want to cut out the middleman, right? So they created these navigation schools and had really famous navigators like Henry the Navigator out there. They were aided by a bunch of Arab technology like the lateen sail on caravel ships, as well as new forms of maps. Spain had, true to form, Columbus. And Columbus is the typical 3Gs, God, glory, and gold, so really fits this system of empire. He's not the first to go out exploring. He's not really that special in general. That's just my argument. Anyways, the Vikings have already been to America. The Basque have already looked at it. Bristol fishermen have been here. The Afro-Phoenicians supposedly had some place here, as well as West Africans, but he was the most persistent. I'll give them in that. The British also wanted to get on this game, but they were a little bit late. So it's funny because the Pope made the Treaty of Tordesillas, excuse me. I don't know why I put a Tita in there. It just happens. The Treaty of Tordesillas was, of course, a Catholic demarcation. And what are the English? Protestant, not Catholic. Thanks, Henry VIII. We appreciate you because you helped the British to ignore literally everything else. They were more of the pirates of the age of exploration, really more than anything else. Kind of funny in that regard. John Cabot was one of their explorers, and he landed near Newfoundland in Canada, way up here. And what we're going to see is that he claimed that everything that he saw and the lands beyond it, so everything else, mind you, other people lived here, were British. Because that's what makes the most sense here. And this is in 1497, 5 years after Columbus set sail. So looking at colonization specifically, when it comes to Spain, South America, and the Caribbean were their places. They set up encomiendas, and these encomiendas are simply like a plantation-based system where you have slaves, and these would be Native American slaves, who would be working the land, typically a sugar plantation. Columbus actually creates this. And this is interesting because these plantations, which have Spanish heads, not like cut off heads, but like authority figure heads, yeah, they were really easy places for disease to spread because they didn't really care about the lifespan of their workers, and because they're slaves and readily available. What you saw is they were in close quarters, and smallpox, which has already been introduced at this point, runs rampant because, well, there's no place for the disease to get quarantined, right? When they're all in the same quarters. Anyways, moving past that, at landing, the population, when Christopher Columbus landed, was 13 to 25 million at our best estimates. By 1600, 108 years later, it was about 700,000. Yeah, 90% decimation. It's an annihilation. This spreads north, this disease, from the Caribbean and also from Mexico and Latin America in general.
Ben Harrison, if you're on campus, we need you to move your car. Ben Harrison, if you're
Clearly.
on campus, please move your car from the B lot. Thank you.
Past that, sorry about that, kids. Basically, it's going to make colonization much, much easier because why? Nobody's there. I mean, some people are there. To be fair, post 1600, they start to, you know, be exposed and have immunities, and as well there's intermarriage, and so you will see that it's not like nobody is there, but there are definitely ghost towns where there used to be a lot of people. In North America specifically, our first settlement we're going to talk about is St. Augustine, Florida. So I'm going to stick it on here, mind you. We've got our lovely little 1491 map. This is going to go away, okay? As we start to see people moving their way in, the natives will be moving out, and it's not their choice, it's what ended up happening. It's our earliest permanent settlement. That's going to be in 1565, okay? And this is a Spanish settlement. So, St. Augustine. And for being smart, the real reason for St. Augustine is it's a military outpost and a base for the missionaries. So I'm just gonna draw a little cross and a little sword. You know, because this is what makes the most sense. Okay. Yes, that's my sword. Take it or leave it. Anyways, they also had New Mexico. Okay, so you might know about Cortez and his journeys through Mexico to Tenochtitlan, making modern-day Mexico City. Well, they went north through up to where our pueblos are, right? So, in 1598, a man named Juan de Onate founded the Spanish outpost after the defeat of the Texas Pueblos. So he creates New Mexico. He goes on to conquer 2 other Pueblo villages and created an encomienda system for the Pueblo villagers. These people barely survived. Why, might you ask? I'd like you to take a gander. Mexico isn't like easily accessible. Really, their main place is like here. But they're settling here. Let's go ahead and call this New Mexico. You might think about the fact that they're traveling with horses. Yeah, that's a slow supply line. You ain't gonna live that long, kiddo. So of course they needed the help of the Pueblos, so they had to work with them until it went well for them. Not actually. Anyways, moving on, really the only reason why this stayed an active colony was, again, our lovely missionaries. Oh yeah. These are the people who keep the Spanish going. It makes a lot of sense when you think about modern day Texas. It's very, very Catholic, and Mexico in that matter. Okay, so looking at the French, another competing European power, they actually went up to Canada into the St. Lawrence Valley. They first attempted this in 1541. They had about 700 people, but you know what hits? You know what always hits? Ah, scurvy. So, yeah, those limes should have been real important on that ship. Yeah, everybody gave up because if you got scurvy, yeah, why would you stay? They also tried to go to South Carolina. Briefly, very briefly. 1562, the French Huguenots, I'm gonna look that up again. I have apparently forgotten. It happens. French religious settlers. Yes, that's it. They also went to Jacksonville, Florida, very, very close to St. Augustine. And this is going to be a competing settlement. Once again, those French religious settlers. This is in 1564. You might recall the Spanish Catholic peoples. They're a little intense. A little intense. And they absolutely annihilated the French settlement in Jacksonville. So they just kind of swallowed it. We'll do that. And once again, the reason why is because of their missionaries. You don't want that kind of rivalry right there, right? Just one of those things. In addition, the French were like, ah, crap. 1565, we've lost Jacksonville. So these French fishermen were trying to figure out how to make some money, and they're going in through the St. Lawrence River Valley, and they end up coming ashore in Canada and realized, you know, those beavers got a nice fur. Their pelt is wonderful for winter. You know what's cold? You know who's in the middle of a mini ice age? Europe. So you know who wants a beaver pelt? Every rich person in Europe. I think we just found our moneymaker. Interesting, right? So they traded for tools as well as cloth and glass beads for beaver pelts with the natives. This is gonna happen all up in here. So this is my idea of a beaver pelt. It's a little tail. Right, so it's a high profit industry, this fur trade is. The French government ends up sending Samuel de Champlain in 1608. They got smart and allied with the natives because who knows where to find the beavers? The natives do. So the specific ones, the Algonquins, the Huron Indians, as well as the Montagnais. So they helped them defeat Iroquois tribes as well as the Mohawk, and gave them access to, the tribes gave them access to the beaver pelts of the interior of this Quebec area, really, as well as security, right? Because now they have a tribe on their side. Okay, so England comes into this game fairly late, and so they have two goals in mind. First is to get a Northwest Passage. This is some famed passage that supposedly there's a river. Get this. A river that would supposedly go all the way across. This does not exist. It does not. But that's okay, because the English thought it did. And they also wanted a base so that they could pirate again and raid the Spanish ships. Makes a lot of sense, right? They were privateers. What is a privateer, you might ask? It is a state-sponsored pirate. Yeah, that's the English for you. Okay, so it gave them a really good basis for their naval sources. So this is how Britain gets a good navy, is their pirate background. They've knighted pirates before. Just seems like the right thing to do, right? Anyways, they ended up pretty much starting their first real settlement, Roanoke Island in the Carolinas. And you might know about Roanoke, you might not. Roanoke is fun. Sir Walter Raleigh had received a royal patent, a charter if you will, in 1584 to start a colony in Virginia. Okay, well, it starts out okay. They relied on the natives a lot for food, and as a result, refused to plant for themselves. You see what happens when you don't plant your own food and you anger people who gave you food. You have no food, correct. Okay, so the natives got really annoyed with the reliance that the English had on them. The English killed a native leader. Ooh, you might guess what's gonna happen to the English. Yeah, there's an Anglo-Spanish War that prevented the English from getting any extra supplies. And so Raleigh's supposed to return back to Roanoke with supplies, but it's delayed until 1590. And when he gets back to the lovely Roanoke, cute little Roanoke, there's only a sign. And it's interesting because once again, these people didn't want to plant. And Raleigh just leaves them to figure this out. So they start starving and dying. And the mystery that's so intriguing is that there's only a post with the word Croatoan written on it left of the settlement. Like everything else is pretty much gone. It's like someone deserted it. So there's only two possible things that could happen to these people. One, they got desperate and decided to be nice to the natives and join the natives, who were named Croatoan. Or they got set upon, there's an attack by the Croatoan. The English didn't know which one, so they didn't ask. Makes sense. Okay, they had a couple of realizations out of Roanoke, though. So I'm just gonna label Roanoke for you. And basically, they were not prepared for this foreign environment. They did not have enough supplies, and they really wouldn't work. Instead, they really just would look for gold and try to find profitable sourcing. The monarchs, lost interest in financing these expeditions. This is important. In the future, they'd have to rely on private investors, private money, right? And at the end of the day, conflict with Spain's kind of a pain. So this would decrease over time as an issue after 1588 with the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Yeah, the English do something right. And then even more so in 1604 with King James I signing a truce with Spain. But until that time, they're like, the Spanish, oh dear. Philip III actually renounced Spanish claims to Virginia. So that's also a really key development for the English coming in. On that note, so Virginia. In 1606, James I granted a charter to two joint stock companies. A joint stock company is essentially a company with a bunch of investors. Joint stock. Stock is something you buy, and a company is like a share of a company. That's what it would be. So a joint stock would be multiple shares of a company, right? So people are investing money, multiple people invest money in this voyage, right? Okay, so the Virginia Company of Plymouth is our first, and they were granted Maine to the Potomac River in Virginia. They sent 120 men to a place called Sagadohoc in 1607, and they failed miserably. They died. It happens. You know, your voyage sucks. It don't work. This is what happens to you. Okay, the Virginia Company of London is the one we care about. So the Virginia Company of London were given Cape Fear to the Hudson River. So, you know, right up in here. Basically, they found Jamestown in 1607 with 105 people. Cute little Jamestown, Virginia. Let's go ahead and make a little Jamestown. This is not precise, my children. Okay, so Jamestown, the colonists were all male. They were gentlemen, and they hated work. They were there for gold. This is a joint stock company. Their goal is profits. They wanted gold. They did not find gold. Spoiler alert. By 1608, we had 38 of the 105 still alive. 1 year. They actually had to turn to cannibalism. Casual. John Smith, the famed John Smith, he finally, kicks him into gear in 1608. He assumes a military style of leadership. He organized work gangs. You don't work, you don't eat. Worked pretty well for them. He also established rules for sanitation and hygiene, such as don't do it in the streets, it's a problem. Furthermore, he made peace with the local native tribe, the Powhatans. Okay, Pocahontas was the daughter of the chief, and she actually marries John Rolfe, one of the colonists, not John Smith, John Rolfe. And John Rolfe is very important, but after the first wars when Pocahontas actually marries him. So John Smith, unfortunately, back to John Smith, returns to England in 1609, and well, when your military guy leaves, people just stop doing what he said. And so the discipline starts to crumble. 400 out of the 500 total colonists had died by 1610. So that's like a 80% death rate. They ain't doing that good. Anyways, there were more new arrivals, and the reinstitution of military rule really helped secure the colony. They actually won the first Powhatan War, 1610 to 1614. Now, this colony isn't profitable at all until about 15 years into its making. So the thing that they would consider brown gold is tobacco. And tobacco is the reason why America becomes such a key place for Britain. In 1619, John Rolfe gets a strain that will grow really well in Virginia, and it becomes profitable. Okay? It actually created a demand for labor because tobacco is a labor-intensive crop. So they had to figure something out, right? They needed more people. So the thing that they thought of was, all right, let's do a head right system. You award 50 acres for each person entering the colony to the person who paid for their passage. So let's say, for example, I am a nice young lad and I need a new world. My father is a debtor and in prison, and I just go to the shipyards of, say, London. And I just start walking around. I'm strong, I'm youthful, hire me. And I see an investor going, head right. And I wonder, what's gonna happen? You go up, you say, I'd like a new world, I'd like some opportunities. He goes, okay, I'll send you over there. You'll work the land. I'll get all the profit. It's a great deal for an investor, right? Assuming that you live. This young lad right here, I'm an indentured servant. Indentured servants contract themselves to labor. They're like slaves, but they have a contract. It's a limited time. Some women did this as well. And it's generally for 4 to 7 year terms. Remember that mortality rate of 80%? How long you think you're gonna last in a colony in a foreign place, right? Okay, in terms of the government, the military rule ended in 1619. They had a representative legislature established about that time. And it was elected by inhabitants the planters, tobacco planters, and subject to veto by the company, Virginia Company of London. The first representative legislature in North America was in Virginia, right? So this is the Virginia Company of London, so I'll just put VCL, parentheses. And furthermore, we want to think about that good old tobacco. So, tobacco. Ooh. And I'm just going to draw it, actually. Yeah, we'll do this. As a cigar. Why not? Don't smoke them, kids. It's bad for you. Addictive. Nicotine is bad. Okay. So, that being said, they had a lot of challenges. We've already talked about a little bit of that, that starvation, mortality rate thing. There's even more than that. There's a lot of local corruption because local officials actually would defraud their shareholders. They profited when the company was falling into debt. So essentially they'd be like, oh, we need more supplies. Please help us. The reality being that these investors actually probably could have told these people, work a little harder. Okay? The death rate, like we said, was extremely high. Mortality because of malnutrition, salt poisoning, typhus, dysentery being diarrhea. And plus, let's be real, they fought with the Powhatans who were really strong. Once Pocahontas dies, the chief who's incidentally named Powhatan also dies. The English keep expanding their lands. They keep pushing and pushing because tobacco also destroys your soil. And so this is going to cause a lot of tension. And so the English kill a Powhatan religious leader, and this leads to the Indian attack of 1622, our second Powhatan War, 1622 to 1632, inflicted massive starvation on the natives. It actually bankrupts the Virginia Company of London too. The English do win, but at high cost to their shareholders. And at this point, in the midst of this, they actually get their charter revoked by King James in 1624. They end up becoming a royal colony, and there's about 500 people there. Most of them are unfree, so that means that we're going to have indentured servants and a few slaves. Our first slave boat comes over in 1619. It's written about in John Rolfe's diary, and he simply refers to a couple of Africans stepping off a boat for sail. So casual, as if it didn't start a whole system that destroyed entire communities. So we're gonna move ourselves from Virginia and move all the way up to the north into New England. And before the Europeans, you might recall smallpox as a devastating disease. And so the epidemic that's been spread by European fishermen, you might recall the French. Yeah, thanks, French. You destroyed whole communities. Actually, in 1616 to 1618, killed roughly 90% of the native population. So the Pequot, the Wampanoag, and a lot of other big natives, tribes are actually going to be pretty hit hard by most of these diseases. Okay, so the Mayflower. You think you know it, you don't know it. Okay, in 1620, the Virginia Company gives a patent to a man named Thomas Weston for settlement. Weston sent 24 families, key, very different from Jamestown. Jamestown had gentlemen, very gentle, right? New England is going to be full of families, religious families, specifically Puritans. There's 102 of them, and they go on that Mayflower. And the colonists agreed to send Thomas Weston back lumber, fur, and fish for 7 years. What does that sound like? Indentured servitude. However, they would own their own land after that 7 years. So not quite the head right system in any regard, because the colonists would own that land. It's their own. Now this makes more sense when you think about that religious context, right? So they're called pilgrims. What we mean are they're separatist pilgrims or separatist Puritans. Okay, so the Church of England, highly corrupt, like mega corrupt. Makes a lot of sense. And so these Puritans wanted to purify the church. Some thought the church had hope still, but most of them really thought that the church had no hope and that they needed to start anew with their Protestant ways. So these individuals would be called pilgrims. They're separatist Puritans, okay? And we're going to take a second.